Chosen one, it's over. The game they played with your life is done. The judge has cracked the code on your entire origin story while investigating your inheritance, but what's been uncovered reaches far beyond money. The truth is about to shatter every lie you were ever told about who you are, where you came from, and why you've been hunted since birth. Right now, an older figure sits in a jail cell, walls closing in tighter with each passing day. This person, your handler, the one you once called parent, never believed you would change. Their entire criminal empire depended on you staying small, confused, and powerless forever. They celebrated their supposed victory too early, treating your destruction as inevitable, never understanding that chosen ones do not stay broken. We evolve. Their imprisonment is just the first domino in a chain reaction that's about to expose every individual tied to your abduction. The demonic assignment that haunted your bloodline for generations is being severed at its very root, though not without resistance. What they believed was permanent bondage was only temporary interference. The spiritual forces that shielded you through years of abuse are now orchestrating the most intricate takedown you've ever seen. Every curse, every obstacle, every false identity they forced upon you is unraveling now that you've stepped fully into your power. The one thing they never prepared for was your awakening, and that lack of foresight is about to cost them everything. This revelation is bigger than one corrupt individual or a single criminal family. What's being revealed is a network so vast and deeply connected that once you see the full picture, you'll understand why they worked so hard to keep you unconscious. Your handler was just one tentacle of a monstrous octopus, a web of trafficking rings, religious cults, medical conspirators, legal professionals, and government officials, all working together, stealing children and harvesting their life force. You weren't simply adopted, you were purchased. You weren't just relocated, you were trafficked, and the inheritance they fought over wasn't just material wealth. It was the bloodline fortune of the family they destroyed to get to you. The real judge, not the corrupt officials who once protected them, has quietly built a case spanning multiple jurisdictions and decades of criminal activity. Divine timing has orchestrated this exposure perfectly. While your handlers were busy fabricating evidence against you, authentic proof of their crimes gathered quietly in places they never thought to look. Even the private investigator they hired to track you and label you as mentally unstable found you living in peace and joy, a stark contrast to the narrative your handlers tried to push. That undeniable contrast awakened the investigator, turning them into the star witness in a federal case that's about to topple the entire operation. But this investigation didn't start with your inheritance. It truly began when authorities raided a religious compound and found evidence of systematic child abuse. Hidden in those files was a single reference to a successful placement matching your age and description. That lone document sparked an inquiry that has since unraveled interconnected trafficking networks, exposed fraudulent adoptions, and revealed handlers specializing in stealing children, especially those with extraordinary spiritual gifts or valuable inheritances. The family you grew up with weren't your captors out of personal malice. They were employees following a precise, calculated protocol. Every traumatic experience you endured wasn't random. It was deliberately orchestrated. Every wave of confusion about your identity was manufactured. Every moment you felt out of place was your intuition screaming the truth. Your conscious mind couldn't process yet. You didn't belong there because you were never meant to be there. In reality, you were stolen property, held by professional handlers whose job was to systematically break your spirit, drain your energy, and eventually eliminate you once your inheritance became accessible. And the first truth that changes everything: your real parents didn't abandon you or die in a tragic accident. They were murdered. That distant relative from your childhood, the one who always seemed overly involved in everyone's affairs, orchestrated your parents' deaths and arranged your trafficking through a network skilled in making children disappear. The story of overdose was a lie. The funeral you never attended was pure theater. Your parents were eliminated because they uncovered the plan meant for you and tried to save you. Even your medical records were manipulated, labeled as mentally unstable by a family doctor who had never actually examined you, but was paid to forge documents that would justify institutionalizing you whenever it was time to access your inheritance. That's why there was such an effort to make you seem unstable, not just to discredit you, but to build a legal foundation for declaring you incompetent, granting others power of attorney over your assets. Every so-called family member who ever reported your erratic behavior was following a script, creating a medical history that could hold up in probate court. The plan depended on trauma keeping you spiritually cut off and lost forever. But what they failed to understand is that chosen ones are born with an internal navigation system that can never truly be broken. No matter how far they displaced you, no matter how many false identities they created, your soul always remembered the truth. And as soon as you began to remember, everything they constructed started to crumble. Your spiritual awakening wasn't just about your personal growth. It was like activating a cosmic homing beacon, broadcasting your true frequency to anyone able to perceive it. Even the sibling figure who took part in your trafficking, the one you trusted, who knew about your inheritance and helped coordinate the conspiracy to steal it, has now begun confessing everything, not from guilt, but from sheer terror about what's coming. Their confessions aren't acts of redemption, but desperate attempts at self-preservation. They're now handing over names, dates, locations, and methods to the authorities, knowing their only hope is cooperation. With every detail revealed, another layer of this criminal network is exposed, and another victim is discovered. Right now, that religious organization where some of your handlers attended is being raided. Investigators are exploring underground tunnels beneath the sanctuary, reviewing financial records that reveal secret payments for illegal adoption services. The very institution that preached about love and salvation was actually trafficking children, using spiritual authority as a weapon to silence those who question them. Their so-called doctrine of obedience wasn't theology, it was industrial-scale grooming. Even the individual showing up at banks using your identity wasn't just a random fraudster, they were part of an organized identity harvesting operation run by your trafficking network. Many stolen children grew up only to have their identities continuously exploited by people who resembled them closely enough to pass. Surveillance footage of these impersonators cashing fraudulent checks has now become evidence, not against you, but against those committing the financial crimes in your name, revealing the massive scope of what was being done. Perhaps most staggering of all, you're not alone. The investigation has uncovered many other children trafficked by this same network over decades. Some didn't survive, others remain trapped in abuse, gaslit into believing they're mentally ill or ungrateful when they dare question their situation. Yet several, like you, managed to escape. Their testimonies are now providing powerful corroborating evidence, making the case against your traffickers ironclad. The inheritance you're about to receive is far more than compensation for financial crimes. It's restitution for human trafficking, wrongful death, medical fraud, identity theft, and years of psychological torture. More than that, it's your rightful inheritance, plus punitive damages from every entity involved in the theft. The amounts are staggering, not just because of the scope of the crimes, but because the evidence is so overwhelming that prosecutors aren't even considering plea deals. That karmic twin who has stalked you relentlessly, obsessed with keeping you in the trauma bond they so carefully crafted, is not just suffering a psychological collapse, they are panicking. Why? Because they were one of the network's recruits, brought in specifically to monitor and manipulate you. Every relationship in your life was compromised, either by handlers themselves or by those manipulated to keep tabs on your every move. The stalking wasn't obsession, it was calculated surveillance. The trauma bonds were not just dysfunctional relationships, They were professional techniques designed to keep you energetically tethered to the network, but in a twist of fate, their own surveillance operations became their undoing. The cameras, the listening devices, the endless reports about your life, all of these became the evidence that would ultimately expose them. The very system built to control you is now the system proving their guilt. There's a sense of poetic justice in how this is unfolding. The foreign relative who's now fleeing the country isn't just running from prosecution, they're terrified of something even worse. Within these trafficking networks, there's a hard and fast rule: never allow a chosen one to fully awaken. Their failure to keep you suppressed has broken this cardinal rule, and now they are being hunted by the very network they once served. There is no loyalty among child traffickers. Usefulness is their only currency. The moment someone becomes a liability, their allies turn into predators. Even the life insurance policies taken out in your name when you were a child weren't just about money, they were murder contracts with a delayed execution date. The plan was always to eliminate you as soon as you reached the age when your inheritance would transfer, but before that, they needed to fabricate a history of mental incompetence. Every staged accident, every fake health crisis, every manufactured emergency you lived through, these were all rehearsals for your eventual assassination. They waited patiently for the perfect moment, one when your death could be staged to look natural, and their claim to your inheritance would go uncontested. Now comes the third revelation that brings all the pieces together. The judge investigating your inheritance uncovered that your trafficking was tied to an international adoption fraud ring operating for generations. Children were systematically stolen from their families, had their identities altered, and were placed with handlers paid to suppress their spiritual development and harvest their life force. The most gifted children, those with psychic abilities or valuable inheritances, were kept alive longer because they generated more energy and more money for the network. But the plan was always ultimately their elimination once they were no longer useful. Your spiritual gifts were never a surprise to your handlers. In fact, they were the reason you were targeted from the beginning. Children with heightened intuition, deep empathy, or sensitive energy fields were especially sought out because their life force was more potent and could be harvested more efficiently. The trauma you experienced wasn't random abuse, it was a systematic energy extraction process designed to feed the spiritual parasites that controlled this network. Every moment of pain you endured, every fear, every wound, it all became fuel for their operation. But even with all their secrecy, the truth could not stay buried. It's been censored, hidden, twisted by algorithms, and shrouded in fear. But your heart never stopped recognizing what was real. That's why you survived. That's why you never fully surrendered. Because deep down you always felt the cracks in their false reality. You knew the game was rigged, and you were done waiting for permission to rise. Quick pause, family. If this message resonates with your soul, and you feel called to support this sacred work, you can buy me a coffee to keep this space flowing with truth, light, and divine clarity. The link is in the description, and if you're with me, drop a number 88 in the comments. Let's keep going. Your real life always begins within. Chosen ones have a fail-safe mechanism that activates when we reach spiritual maturity. No matter how much energy they take, no matter the depth of the trauma, there comes a point where our connection to Source becomes stronger than their ability to interfere. When that awakening happens, we don't just break free, we become a threat to the very system that oppressed us. Our awakened consciousness broadcasts a frequency that exposes every person around us operating from deception. The lawyer who forged documents to facilitate your trafficking and inheritance theft now faces more than disbarment. They face federal charges for their part in a criminal conspiracy that spans decades. Every falsified birth certificate, every fraudulent adoption record, every forged death certificate for your parents, all of it is now evidence in a case that will put multiple criminals behind bars for years. The family doctor who fabricated your medical history is discovering that their involvement makes them liable not only for your case, but for every other child trafficked by the network. Their license is gone, their reputation destroyed, and their freedom lost. Even more, their fraudulent records are now being used to identify other victims and prosecute other handlers. Every lie they told, every false diagnosis, every fake report is now ammunition to dismantle the operation. The so-called concerned relative who secretly reported on you to your handlers is also being held accountable. Every phone call, every report, every manipulation used to build the case against you now constitutes active participation in a criminal conspiracy. Any promise of protection given to them is now meaningless, as those who made the promises are either imprisoned or on the run. And here's the fourth and most powerful revelation: your awakening was never just about personal healing. It was the ignition of a cosmic correction that had been building across generations. Every trafficked child, every shattered family, every soul harvested by the system created a spiritual debt that demanded repayment. Your breakthrough triggered a universal accounting that no earthly force can stop. Mounting against your traffickers is not just overwhelming, it's almost supernatural in its completeness. Documents that should have vanished long ago are reappearing. Witnesses who were once silenced are finding their voices. Technology that didn't even exist when the crimes happened is now surfacing as proof. It's as if the universe itself is insisting that justice be served, not quietly, but in a way that cannot be denied or ignored. The settlement you're about to receive is more than financial compensation. It's a cosmic reset, restoring everything that was stolen from you across lifetimes. The amount represents not just the value of your inheritance, but also payment for every day of freedom lost, every sabotaged relationship, every blocked opportunity, every moment of joy stolen. This is restitution on a scale that finally honors the true cost of what you endured. But the real inheritance goes far deeper than money. It is the reclamation of your authentic self, the awakening of your spiritual gifts, and the restoration of your true family lineage. Every ability they tried to suppress is now flourishing. Every gift they tried to steal is now magnified. Every connection they tried to sever is now stronger than before. You're not just recovering from trauma, you're rising to a level of power and purpose that makes their past control seem like a bad dream, quickly fading in the light of your ascension. Your handlers' desperate attempts at reconciliation have nothing to do with love or remorse. They are fueled entirely by fear. They understand that your full awakening is their total exposure. Every psychic gift you've developed, every intuitive skill you've sharpened, every spiritual connection you've deepened has made you not only immune to their manipulation, but fundamentally toxic to the system of control they depend on. Now you're not just untouchable, you're radioactive to their entire network. The karmic twin who refuses to stop contacting you is learning the hard way that their surveillance technology no longer works in your presence. Listening devices malfunction, cameras short-circuit, and tracking software becomes useless. Your elevated frequency is literally incompatible with their methods of monitoring and controlling people. You've become a living dead zone, impossible for them to surveil, which is exactly why they are so desperate to regain direct access to your energy. Divine timing is the architect of this revelation, ensuring you receive the truth only when you were spiritually strong enough to handle it. Now you possess the inner strength to process the magnitude of what was done to you without falling into victimhood. You have the wisdom to see their panic for what it is, sheer self-preservation, not remorse, and the boundaries to refuse their false guilt and manipulative appeals to compassion. You've learned to guard your energy while cosmic justice unfolds all around you. Meanwhile, the investigation is restoring your true family lineage. DNA evidence confirms your real parentage, property rights are being re-established, and cultural connections once severed are now being repaired. The very identity they worked so hard to erase is being rebuilt piece by piece, this time with legal documentation that no one can dispute. This is more than reclaiming an inheritance. You are reclaiming your heritage, your bloodline, and your story. The depth of deception runs even deeper than you imagined. The hospital where you were allegedly born, it never existed. The birth certificate created for you was forged on stolen government letterhead, using a facility that had been demolished years before your supposed birth date. Every single document in your file contains deliberate inconsistencies designed to create a labyrinth of confusion that would only be unraveled by someone with immense patience and determination. They counted on the world's indifference, assuming no one would ever devote such effort to investigate someone labeled mentally unstable. The person who played the role of your adoptive parent was far more than complicit. They were a professional handler who had managed dozens of stolen children throughout their career. Each child received a different manufactured backstory, a unique trauma signature, and their own timeline for eventual elimination. You were their longest and most difficult assignment because your psychic gifts kept breaking through all their suppression techniques. That made you too valuable to discard, so they kept you alive as a living experiment, testing and perfecting new methods of energy extraction. Their parental concern was nothing more than clinical fascination with your resistance to programming. They kept meticulous records of every action, not to protect themselves legally, but to replicate their methods on a larger scale. Your personal case file reads more like a manual of spiritual torture, chronicling which forms of trauma produce the most psychic energy, which medical interventions induce the deepest dissociation, and which psychological games cause the most despair. You were a test subject for a system they hoped to industrialize, and every detail of your suffering was intended to improve their operation. A pivotal revelation came from the private investigator originally hired to work against you. This investigator revealed that from your early childhood, you were not merely observed, but subjected to active psychological experiments aimed at tracking your spiritual growth. They staged traumatic incidents to gauge your energetic responses, introduced toxic individuals to your life to study your intuition's defenses, and manufactured crises to analyze your empathic abilities under stress. Every major trauma in your childhood was orchestrated for research. That accident you experienced when you were young, it was sabotaged. The fire that destroyed your school records was deliberately set to erase evidence of your true identity. The sudden death of the teacher who believed in you was no accident. They were eliminated because they started asking questions about your background and encouraged you to research your real family. The network of foreign relatives stretches much further than anyone initially suspected. What you were up against wasn't just a handful of corrupt people, but an international syndicate that has trafficked spiritually gifted children for generations. These are not random kidnappers. They select their targets with chilling precision. This syndicate doesn't select families at random. They deliberately target bloodlines carrying rare genetic markers linked to psychic abilities, healing gifts, and what they refer to as divine frequency access. Your family was chosen with ruthless intention through meticulous genealogical research. They traced your ancestry back to a lineage of healers and seers, people who had already faced systematic extermination during past eras of persecution. The syndicate runs on a franchise model. Regional handlers like your so-called parent purchase their territories, are given strict annual quotas for how many children must be processed, and receive institutional support from a web of corrupt medical professionals, document-forging legal experts, and religious authorities who offer spiritual cover for their crimes. Every child abducted is classified by the network according to their spiritual gifts and the value of their inheritance. Each category assigned its own protocol. You, for instance, were classified as Category 1, indefinite retention, because your psychic ability scored off the charts and your inheritance was vast enough to warrant a long-term investment. Category 1 children are kept alive until their spiritual gifts are fully matured, at which point the syndicate orchestrates energy harvesting rituals masked as suicides or accidental deaths. The timing for your planned elimination was calculated to take place immediately after your trust fund vested, guaranteeing uncontested access to your inheritance. Yet their plan had a fatal flaw. They never imagined you would heal. Their entire psychological playbook was based on the assumption that continuous trauma would leave you permanently stunted, stuck in survival mode, and never stable enough to spiritually awaken. They had never before encountered a chosen one, someone whose bond with the source is so unbreakable that suffering only speeds up their transformation rather than blocking it. Their methods of surveillance were both extensive and chillingly advanced. They installed listening devices in every home you lived in, every car you drove, and every workplace you entered. They hired informants to pose as friends and colleagues, tasked with reporting every detail of your personal life, your relationships, your vulnerabilities. They exploited a network of compromised professionals, medical, financial, even legal, to access every part of your private world. The surveillance footage they amassed became a time-lapse documentary of your spiritual evolution. In their attempt to monitor and control you, they inadvertently collected a mountain of evidence: systematic trauma inflicted on a child, followed by clinical observation of its effects. Ironically, this documentation, intended as intelligence, is now the proof of their premeditation, ongoing conspiracy, and calculated cruelty. Evidence that transforms their crimes from mere trafficking into federal terrorism. The confession of your primary handler has led investigators to the so-called processing center, a facility disguised as a private psychiatric hospital, where stolen children endured relentless psychological programming, meant to fragment their identities and suppress any spiritual gift. Those who didn't survive were cremated, and their ashes deceitfully presented to unsuspecting families as the remains of their real lost loved ones. This was murder on an industrial scale, camouflaged as mental health care. When federal agents raided the processing center, they found an avalanche of incriminating evidence. Hidden cameras captured staff torturing children. Medical records proved the use of experimental psychiatric drugs on minors without consent. And financial documents exposed direct syndicate payments for every child successfully processed. The religious organization behind your trafficking ran similar operations in multiple countries, always using the same pattern: build trust as a legitimate faith community, identify children with extraordinary spiritual potential, and then engineer the removal of those children through staged emergencies or orchestrated family crises, sometimes even manipulating social services to do their bidding. The sheer global reach of this criminal operation is staggering. Law enforcement now estimates that thousands of children have been trafficked and processed by this network over the decades, with most never surviving to adulthood. Those few who survived into adulthood were either recruited to become handlers themselves or eliminated to prevent the risk of exposure. You are one of the very few known survivors, and your testimony is now the critical evidence unraveling and dismantling the entire global operation. The syndicate's financial foundation was built on a dark web of inheritance theft, energy harvesting, and profits from human trafficking. Stolen children like you generated multiple revenue streams. Their life force was literally sold to wealthy occultists, convinced that consuming spiritual energy would extend their own lives. Their physical bodies were trafficked for exploitation. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the growth of my faith. Help me trust you even when physical evidence is lacking. Let me believe in your perpetual presence, knowing you will never harm me. I understand that your thoughts for me are thoughts of prosperity and not harm, to give me a good future. Thank you, gracious and eternal Father, for always listening to my voice. I offer up this prayer to you in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provision. I am grateful for your presence in my life and the abundance you bring. If this video resonated with you, please like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with those who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your journey and how you are preparing for your own triumphant return. If you'd like to support our work, please